There's a place where I am going. It's out of my control, so I'm gonna cruise for a little while. Oh, brother, there's a lot.
This TMS talk comes from the Rich Roll podcast, a conversation between Rich Roll, one of my favorite podcast hosts, and Steve Magnus, former Nike Oregon Project track coach and current writer and expert on human athletic performance. I think the athletes out there are going to appreciate this one, as it sheds some light on the immense pressure that often comes with being a competitive athlete, and it reveals the far-reaching implications this has for TMS. Okay, here it is.
Interested in, which is this idea of how do we cultivate not just great athletes who are resilient and capable of optimizing performance, but ultimately good human beings, and the principles that you've learned as a coach that translate into the workplace and into our personal lives, etc. So maybe a good place to start while we're on the subject of running and the 401 mile is really what appears to be an impetus for this book, which is this other mile that you were running where you had this vocal cord incident that made you rethink your approach to stress and your approach to toughness in general.
Yeah. So this happened when I was in college. I was in the middle of a mile at Cal Berkeley, running against some really good runners, trying to break the 4-minute barrier. Was running really well, and then all of a sudden, after 3 laps or so, I couldn't breathe. And when I say I couldn't breathe, I literally could not get air in. Mm-hmm. And it sent me, what in the hell's going on? I collapsed on the ground. I'm trying to figure out how to breathe.
And the way you describe it, sorry to step over your words, but the way you describe it is, it's not that you were out of your depth in terms of exertion, you were pacing yourself and you felt like you were, hitting the mark that you needed to hit at that stage of the race. I think you had a lap and a half left or something like that, and you're like, I'm right where I need to be. So it wasn't like, oh, I just overexerted myself or misjudged my pace. It was something altogether different.
Yes. It was as if someone had, shoved something down my throat and I was choking. That's the best way I can describe it. Not, there was just nothing that could get in or out of that passageway. And what it turned out to be after a lot of testing is that it was this thing called vocal cord dysfunction, which is essentially what happens what normally happens is, your vocal cords open when you breathe and shut when you don't, and they just kind of go back and forth. For whatever reason, my vocal cords almost flipped, where the stress signal told them to shut when they should be opened. And it's this really weird kind of disorder that is more common than we think, but it often gets confused with asthma, even though it's the opposite effect. So what happens, and what the research tells you, is that it generally happens in driven, perfectionist type individuals who, for whatever reason, have some sort of trigger that just almost makes the brain go haywire and have this opposite reaction. And what I had to learn to do from that is, I was so accustomed to being well, how do you handle pain? You just push through, you dig deeper, you grit your teeth and put your head down and go and push for it. And that would no longer work, because if I did anything that caused any sort of anxiousness or tension in me, that became a trigger for my vocal cords literally shutting, and then I'd have to drop out and figure out how to breathe again.
Right, so you're forced into this situation where you have to figure out a different way to avoid that response, which is going to require an antithetical relationship with pushing through pain, and more of a Eastern philosophical, kind of letting go, surrender, mindfulness, driven relationship with sport in order to avoid having that kind of an incident.
Exactly.
This content has been created with the sole intent of educating about, increasing awareness around, and deepening the understanding of the mind-body syndrome, and more broadly speaking, the mind-body-spirit connection. To hear this clip in its full context, please visit the original media source. And to learn more about the mind-body-spirit connection, you can visit howtosayfupolitely.com. Until next time, love your struggle and remain free.